It has been a devastating week.
When gunshots killed Cincinnati police officers Ronald Jeter and Daniel Pope near midnight last Friday night, Greater Cincinnati was plunged into a week of shock, grief, and introspection. In public, the week has been focused on wakes, funerals, and somber motorcades, ceremonies designed to give family, friends, and community an opportunity to mourn. In private, the week has been filled with troubled discussions in living rooms and in offices about the meaning of these devastating events for the future of police-community relations. Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. In an effort to begin thinking constructively about the future of police-community relations, I am joined this morning by Jim Frank, an assistant professor of criminal justice at the University of Cincinnati. Jim, thanks for being with us this morning.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about the sort of research that you do in this area of police-community relations.
My research fits into a couple areas. One of the main ones is citizens' attitudes towards the police, and then also I do a number of projects on looking at police behavior and evaluating certain types of police strategies.
Okay. In general, from that research, what can you say about the state of police community relations? And is your research focused on Cincinnati or on a number of communities?
No, it's been on Cincinnati and then also in other communities, Detroit
What
specifically.
can we say about the state of police community relations in Cincinnati? Has it been exceptionally good, exceptionally bad, kind of at the norm for what cities this size are?
I think probably at the norm. Research indicates that most people have favorable attitudes, but there are differences in opinions among different groups of people, that it fluctuates a little bit up and down, though normally most people have a somewhat positive attitude towards the police.
When you say people with different groups, with people with different backgrounds, what sorts of things affect maybe a negative or a less favorable view of police?
Generally, what they find in research on attitudes is that, one, there's some differences among groups of people, meaning that younger people and generally people of African American background or other minorities tend to have a somewhat less favorable attitude towards the police. Also, people's contacts with individual officers tend to affect their behavior. People that evaluate a contact with an officer in a negative light tend to have a more negative attitude towards the police.
People who are younger, people with African American backgrounds, is that partly because their contacts with police tend to be negative? And this sort of this thing that we hear a lot, that especially young black males are stopped randomly, that there are some other experiences that maybe people like you and I don't have with the police.
That could be part of it. There's also a history effect. You don't necessarily have to be stopped by the police to hear about other stopping, so it's sort of a vicarious transmission of information to people that really haven't had any contact. There's partly a history effect that prior years' experiences that are passed down among groups of people that have a different effect than different kind of contact than you or I might have.
Well, given this sort of normal situation that you've described in terms of generally favorable but varying within groups given their experience, I have been struck, and I think a lot of people I've talked to have been struck by the seeming depth of response to the killings of these two officers this week. What's your reaction to what you've seen about the way Cincinnati has reacted?
Well, I think it's a police killing has a tendency to unite not only the police but also the community. There's a view of the police as sort of the protectors of society or society's morals, that even though you may not have the most favorable attitudes, you do feel bad or distraught when you read about a police killing. Killings are very random events, and they're not very common, luckily. I think the average is somewhere between 90 and 100 police officers are killed a year across the United States. And a lot of those are accidental killings. I think the research indicates about 75% of the killings of officers are actually felonious killings. and they're very rare events, and they bring the police department together, but they also show a lot of they bring a lot of community members together. There's a show of really power and authority that we give police officers to fight, so to speak, the evils in society, and it brings a lot of people together who feel bad about this kind of situation.
The fact that it's been 10 years since a Cincinnati police officer had been killed on duty, the fact that it had been so long, you think that had an impact, that we'd sort of forgotten how dangerous that job was?
I think people don't understand the potential dangerousness of policing. That an event like this brings out how dangerous it can be. People are used to reading about other types of incidents, not police killings. They're normally not involved in one. Most police officers don't even shoot a gun during their police career. People forget about the potential for dangerousness, and it's really the potential for dangerousness and incidents like this that really influence how police officers approach situations, whether it be a domestic violence or any kind of situation.
Given this strong response, what do you expect? How long does this last? What's the long-term impact of this? Will the city really change in some sort of significant way its relationship to its police because of this tragedy?
I don't really know. My guess is that, or my belief is that incidents like this tend to solidify things or make people feel better in the long run, but it only lasts until the next incident. Unfortunately, what happens with police is that one incident in the paper or in the media tends to have a big effect on people's attitudes. If the next incident is a negative one, it'll have a very big effect negatively on attitudes. Most of the research indicates that one negative incident can wipe out a lot of good or positive feedback on the police. And so that it depends on what the next incident is. I would think in the short run that it will have a positive effect.
You, because of the work you do at the university, you've trained some of our police officers, you know some of the police officers. This has been a tough year, the past 12, 16 months. There's been a lot of criticisms, a lot of focus on some of those negative incidents. Given that, do you think that that's part of what's going on here too? Because in a sense, police, I had the sense that maybe before this incident, the police were really feeling pushed down and rejected by the community. And all of a sudden, they've come together, but the community has shown it too. They've seen the need to get some more balance back into this.
I think it's had that effect, but also this is, from what we know so far, and I'm not privy to any information that anybody else isn't privy to, and that is that this is an incident where it's unquestionably not, the police did nothing wrong, or it appears that the police did nothing wrong. The police were not reacting against anybody with force. They were undertaking what is very normal police behavior, routine behavior, and so you have a situation where sort of the bad guy won in this instance against the police. And so that kind of thing tends to override, at least temporarily, the incidences where there's questionable behavior or there's questions about the behavior. Whether it's questionable or not, I don't know. But where there's questions about it, such as in Lorenzo Collins and Farron Crosby, and different incidences like that. This was one where the police were not taking any kind of aggressive posture. They were not using any kind of force. The force was totally directed at the police officers. And I think this is an incident that highlights the fact that policing is an occupation where you can be intentionally assaulted by someone.
Not many of us are in those occupations. Is there something that the police force or the city government could be doing proactively on the heels of this incident when the community's attention is on the need to support the police? Are there things that could be done?
Proactive behavior is helpful, but only if it's followed with actual behavior. The problem in the past, or the problem in some police agencies, not necessarily here, has been more talk and less action. And so that police-community relations are really built by doing things together, or actual behaviors that occur, and therefore talk cheap behavior is much more powerful. And so that things like community policing, where the police are out, where they're talking to where they're talking to citizens, communicating with citizens, participating in community groups, etc. Those kind of things could lead to much better relationships. And it's those kind of things they should be engaging in.
Well, that sort of roots back to your comment early on that it's that individual relationship with an individual officer, and community policing really reinforces that. And do you see that has been a policy of this department? Do you see that as a really important policy to keep pursuing?
I see that as a very important policy, and I think that the kind of contacts officers can have with citizens that are not in an enforcement mode can tend to have a beneficial effect on attitudes of community members, where they go out and they're not acting against somebody but acting with somebody, can have a very beneficial impact. And the problem is that you have to overcome history effects that influence people's attitudes.
Well, thank you very much for being with us this morning. This is a difficult time for the whole community, and we really appreciate it, and good luck in your work at the university.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. For 44 days, Matthew Eisen, who grew up in Delhi Township, has been fasting in Central America, trying to get the attention of the United States government. After the break, I will be joined by Matthew's mother and two of his friends to talk about the issues that are at stake. Welcome back. In the 1980s, guerrilla warfare raged in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and other Central American countries. Fueled by Cold War rivalries, the U.S. military was actively engaged, and American attention was focused on the issues plaguing the region. Now the Cold War is over. Truces have brought varying degrees of ceasefire and peace, but Central America remains a cauldron of unresolved issues. For 45 days, Cincinnati native Matthew Eisen, who works with young people in El Salvador, has been fasting along with Father Joseph Mulligan, a Jesuit from Chicago who operates a children's nutrition project in Nicaragua, and 3 others. They are asking that the United States government release all documents relating to the death of Father James Carney, a Jesuit who ministered to the peasants of Honduras and died under unclear circumstances in April 1983. Thus far, the documents that have been released have been substantially blacked out, raising questions about the possible involvement of the United States or its allies. To discuss Matthew Eisen's fast and the issues that drive it, I am joined this morning by 3 people. Betty Eisen is the mother of Matthew. Irene Hodgson is the professor of modern languages at Xavier University. Professor Hodgson has also traveled extensively in Central America and is the editor of the English language edition, or the translator, of the Diaries of Archbishop Oscar Romero. Patrick Harmon has spent a semester in Nicaragua and also some time in Honduras as part of Xavier University's Central American program, and is a friend of Matthew's. Thank you for joining us on Newsmakers. Betty, when's the last time you talked to Matthew?
Yesterday.
Yesterday?
Yesterday I called him and was able to talk with him, and his spirits are still very high. He is very energetic.
So the experience of 45 days of fasting, I might mention that we're taping this show on Friday, even though it's being seen on Sunday. So at this moment, it's 45 days. So the experience of fasting for 45 days has not diminished his commitment to the cause?
Not at all. He still feels very positive about this, and of course, with all the prayers and support of everyone, the friends, relatives, and the community of Our Lady of Victory, he knows we're all behind him, and it really has given him a lot of support with carrying this out.
Irene, the particular case that the fast is focused on is trying to get information about Father James Carney.
Yes.
And this is a book about Father Carney.
By Father Carney.
By Father Carney. Give us a thumbnail of who he was, and also why is it still, this many years later, important to try to find out what happened to him?
Well, Father Carney was a Jesuit priest who spent close to around 20 years in Honduras working with peasants and peasant cooperatives, and had a great commitment to the workers and to the poor, which led him into the title of the book there is To Be a Revolutionary. And he makes a very strong statement at the end that to be a Christian is to be a revolutionary, and if you're not revolutionary, you're not a Christian, which his sister and brother-in-law in the introduction to the book say that they don't necessarily agree with all of his conclusions. And I'm not sure I do totally either, but I don't think anybody can challenge his commitment. He became a Honduran citizen, and in 1979, his Honduran citizenship was taken away from him and he was deported. And he worked for between 2 and 3 years on the border between Nicaragua and Honduras. And after writing this in both Spanish and English, then he went back into Honduras with a group of 96 guerrillas who were basically wiped out, feeling that they were entitled to chaplain and sacraments and so forth too. As you said, it's very unclear what happened to him because there are different reports of torture. There's stories. At one point, someone who was interrogated said he might have starved to death or died of exhaustion in the jungle, and then that keeps being repeated. There are other stories that he was tortured and thrown from a helicopter, that he was at El Aguacate, which was, I think, a Contra base, so that there were also U.S. people there.
But the point is, at this stage, we do not know exactly what happened, and what Matthew and the others are trying to do is find that out.
Right.
Before I come back to really what I threw in as a second question, let me go to Patrick. Patrick, you know Matthew, and you grew up here in Cincinnati as well. How does a experience of living in El Salvador or Nicaragua for a period of time, or Honduras for a period of time, how can that change your life and your view of life?
Well, it changed my life. I think seeing the extreme poverty and the conditions that people are living in, and the lack of democracy, the lack of voice that people have to construct their own future. And also, it's a real shock to find out how much of the attention in those countries is focused on the United States, and how much a small decision that may not mean much here means so much to those people and can create a better society for those people to live in. I think an experience in a Central American country or in any third world country makes you a very humble person.
Coming from where we come from.
Yes.
Irene, let me get back to this point. This issue about getting documents released isn't just about Father Carney.
No, not at all.
And it's not just about Americans that were involved in that situation. Put us in a larger context. What's the larger context here of what's going on now in Honduras?
Well, an even larger context would be Latin America in general. With the dictatorships of the 70s and 80s, there seems to have been a policy of making people disappear, and the families not being able to get information as to what happened to them, not having the bodies, not knowing where they were buried. And there have been movements from the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, and in Chile now, in Guatemala, the Truth Commission in El Salvador. There have been many, many movements trying to get information. Part of this is for people to take responsibility for what they've done. Part of it is also for some kind of healing to take place. I mean, we're looking at the Truth Commission in South Africa now, which is different than the ones that have happened in South America or in Latin America in the last few years, where the Truth Commissions, those who were found responsible, there were no trials brought, and they were not made to admit any responsibility. Where in South Africa, the people are receiving amnesty if they admit what they've done. But it's very important that If you take Argentina or Chile as a case, and I would hate to see the same situation keep repeating itself. I think the countries are as polarized as they ever were. That the people that were doing those things, many of them still believe that they were right, and if there's never any kind of national accounting or repentance,
Where do we go?
yes.
Betty, I want to get to this. One of the things that has been released, and you saw this, I am sure, these are the documents that have been released by the U.S. government, and completely, some pages completely blacked out, other pages substantially blacked out, and the things that are left don't tell us much. What was your reaction when you saw this sort of response?
I was shocked. I never realized that they could say they're giving you information and hand you papers of that structure. It just was shocking to me that the government would do something like that.
And do you think this shocked Matthew?
Oh, very definitely. That's why he's working as hard as he is to get information for these families.
My understanding, Patrick, is that it's bigger than this case as well, because there is legislation in Congress asking the United States to cooperate in releasing documents so that Honduras and Guatemala particularly can move forward with finding, determining what happened. Where does that stand, and are you hopeful that the United States government will positively respond to that?
Yes, I am hopeful. It's called the Human Rights Information Act. It focuses on the countries of Honduras and Guatemala, yet within the bill itself it adds that upon request from a human rights commission in another country, they can also receive declassified information. Irene, do you know more about the standing on it now?
It was only introduced in September by Senator Dodd.
And at this
September
point,
the
my
25th.
understanding is that about 17 senators and about 32 congressmen have signed on as co-sponsors. One thing that I note in that list is not one from Ohio.
Right.
Any place from Ohio is on that list at this point. Have you received much response as a family member of Matthew, and he has gotten some attention, from Congress or from your representatives about this?
No, I haven't. I haven't received anything. Friends and relatives have called, and anyone that knows Matthew with support, but as far as hearing from the congressmen or senators, I haven't.
The one thing I can say is that Congressman Steve Shabat's office has requested a tape of this show. He tried to rearrange his schedule to be here today, was unable to do that, but they did request that we send him a tape, and we will. Patrick?
There were some form letters and many letters that have been written both to Shabat and to DeWine, and we recently received, and Glenn, recently received a reply from DeWine basically telling us thank you for supporting this issue, and it also in the letter goes back to the previous reply that the Carney family has been receiving for years, that Jim Carney had died of starvation in the jungle. I think that if that was the case, why do we have so many pages of documents, and why are they edited
Why
in
are
this
they
manner?
blacked?
It kind of speaks for itself.
And this nobody knows what's under that black. It could be that Americans were directly involved. It could be that allies were involved. Nobody knows. As long as it's blacked out, what's really there is the point, and it keeps it a secret. Irene?
A few years ago on the op-ed page of the New York Times, they did two versions of a document from El Salvador that had been declassified, blacked out, and then later with a little bit more information. And it was very clear that the blacking out had made it look the opposite of what the original document said, which makes it even more worrisome as to what the black is covering up.
So actually, this kind of release raises more questions than it answers, and it doesn't put anybody's mind at ease. At Xavier University, you've been sending students to Nicaragua as part of an organized program. Will that continue? Do you believe that that's having a good impact?
I do. I'm not directly involved with the program, but there's a group going that's ready to go in January.
Good. So another one just in next month.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you all for joining us this morning, and we will follow this case and, of course, try to follow it on the news, on the satellite this morning. Thank you very much. And you join us again next Sunday when Michael Snowden will be our guest. Good morning. But hold on.